Welcome to the Forgotten Narrator. There's a blankness in the records that feels almost sacred. You open the ancient data slate, and there should be something, a campaign report, kill team roster, Xenos requisition forms, but there's only static, and you feel it, even before the realization settles in. This was erased on purpose. Not hidden, not classified, erased. Not a name, not a planet, not a single bolt shell's log remains, and yet the void itself screams. The Deathwatch, the Imperium's apex alien hunters, do not simply vanish. They do not fail quietly. When they fall, their martyrdom is etched into tomb shrines and warrior litanies across 1,000 chapters. But there are whispers, broken vox hymns, corrupted hololiths, insane scribbles in the margins of inquisitorial tomes of a name that should not exist. Enoulian. No one survives them. Not physically. Not in memory. Not in the echoes of war. There are many silences in the Imperium, but few are as haunting as the void where the Deathwatch should be. Within the labyrinthine data vaults of the Administratum, entire sectors' worth of Deathwatch records simply end. No closure, no formal termination, no honors bestowed, just an abrupt cessation. Requisitions stop mid-cycle. Vox cipher chains terminate on uncoded frequencies. Most chilling of all, when cross-referenced with Segmentum fleet logs, there are clear indications that kill teams were dispatched, but those same ships never returned. No wreckage, no maydays, just absence. There's an awful gravity to that kind of silence, and the further one digs, the more unnatural it feels. One case, often whispered among rogue savants and inquisitorial heretics, concerns Watch Fortress Halcyon Morn, a formidable bastion once anchored in orbit above the gas giant Drevoris Eim. Not only is there no mention of its destruction, but all cartographic data from nearby systems has been redacted. It's as if the region were never charted, the stars themselves forgotten. And yet, in deep archive astropath stream logs, that name, Halcyon Morn, recurs again and again, like a bruise pressing through layers of denial. The Inquisition's role in this silence cannot be ignored. In the rare instances where fragments are recovered, such as a blood-stained pauldron bearing a blackened silver arm, or a corrupted holovid showing kill marines fighting something that distorts the frame itself, there's a near instantaneous purge. Tech priests vanish, adepts are silenced, and any magos who dares to recover the data finds his cogitator banks mysteriously wiped within hours. More than once, it's been suggested that the Xenos has entire divisions dedicated to the erasure of Deathwatch records, not because of shame or failure, but because of something worse. Something incompatible with continued survival. The emotional toll of this cannot be overstated. Space Marines are not known for sentimentality, but they are fanatically bound by duty and remembrance. When a battle brother falls, his sacrifice is recorded and enshrined. When a Deathwatch kill team completes a mission, their honor is immortalized, even posthumously. And yet, in these cases, the Enoulian cases, there is only emptiness. Veterans who served in nearby campaigns speak of a deep unease, an almost instinctive revulsion, when their thoughts wander too close to certain systems. They remember not remembering something. And that paradox breaks even their hardened discipline. Among the librarians, things are worse. A few scattered accounts describe psychic investigations into the voids where these Deathwatch teams vanished. In every case, the result was the same. The psyker either collapsed screaming or became catatonic. One such librarian, Brother Bibliothecary Elthior of the Iron Hands, managed to etch a single phrase into his chamber wall before his mind disintegrated. They unmade the oath. What that means has never been understood, but it hangs like a funeral bell over every investigation. It is this unnaturalness, not simply death but erasure, that provokes such fear. The Imperium, for all its barbarism, is built on continuity, on record-keeping, even if warped by zealotry. When something disappears, it's usually chaos, or the warp, or some known enemy. But when something is made to disappear, perfectly, completely, it implies an intelligence that understands the Imperium better than it understands itself. An intelligence capable of identifying the Deathwatch, perhaps the most unpredictable, adaptable, and skilled of all Astartes formations, as a threat so serious that it must not only be destroyed, but unremembered. And perhaps the greatest horror is this. No matter how deeply you scour the archives, how many redacted documents you reconstruct, how many psychic imprints you chase, the absence remains complete. As if the Deathwatch never fought there. As if they never existed. As if we were the ones being rewritten. There's something terrifying about a name that isn't supposed to exist. Something that pulls at the edges of memory, like a whisper you almost heard in a dream or a scream buried beneath static. The name Enoulian is one such anomaly. It doesn't appear in the Grand Index of Xenos threats, nor in the archived war hymns of the Adeptus Astartes. It's absent from inquisitorial taxonomies, from Ordo Xenos vaults, even from the memory crypts of Mars itself. But it's there, lurking, in the footnotes that shouldn't be, the margins of erased data slates, the half-burned prayer scrolls clutched in dead hands. It exists only where it should not. Some say the first true appearance of the name was found scrawled into the wall of an abandoned astropathic choir chamber, written in blood mixed with oil, a language that shifted and shimmered until deciphered under blacklight and incense. Others speak of a dying Deathwatch Marine, his vox-link corrupted, his voice gibbering nonsense until a single word cut through in clear, high Gothic, Enoulian. And then silence. Forever. One inquisitorial cryptologist, Codicir Varncalis, documented a series of reports in which the name appeared in Vox feedback loops during Deathwatch missions that were never recorded in official logs. These loops began as standard comm chatter, tactical, precise, but then twisted. They bent back on themselves, overlapping, repeating, until a single distorted syllable repeated endlessly. Enoulian, Enouli, Enoulian. After 3 such events, Varncalis was declared missing. His data stacks were scorched. His servo-skull archivist found hollow with its memory coils removed. That name is a curse, some say. Not a designation, not a species classification, but a vector. A word that carries with it the infection of knowledge. Like certain scrap codes used by the Dark Mechanicum, or warp-touched hymns of the ruinous powers, the very sound of Enoulian seems to breach something in the mind. Those who've heard it speak of dreams turning alien, memories reshaped into geometries that shouldn't exist. One radical magos speculated that the name isn't a name at all, but an interface, a key to understanding an intelligence that exists outside of language and which uses names the way viruses use DNA. Among Deathwatch survivors, rare and broken, the reactions to the word are uniformly violent. One ultramarine veteran, retrieved in stasis drift near the edges of Segmentum Obscurus, tore out his secondary hearts and screamed until his throat collapsed when the word was spoken during debrief. Another, a salamander, simply shut down, his brain exhibiting no signs of trauma, but every neuron rendered inert. Not dead, not damaged, just empty. There is an irony in how the Enoulians, if that is even their name, reveal themselves only through absence. They are the inverse of the tyrannid biomass sprawl, the opposite of the orc whack, the shadow cast by the Necron dynasties. They do not announce themselves with banners or slaughter. They erase the announcers. They silence the narrators. And that silence seeps backward, like rot in the spine of a tree, until the records themselves decay. The name persists, nonetheless, in the whispered tales of Exodite Eldar, in the glyphs carved onto Crone World ruins, and, most disturbingly, in the half-mad ravings of certain navigators who claim to have glimpsed a fold in the stars where a name becomes a knife. These navigators speak of a place in the immaterium where the word Enoulian pulses like a heart, a single rhythm, a beat that marks a presence we are not meant to see. And still, the word surfaces, as a graffiti tag in the underhive of Necromunda, as a glitch in a Mechanicus hymn cycle, as a child's chant on a feral world long thought barren. The name endures, because something, somewhere wants it to. But no matter how often it surfaces, how often it is burned, forbidden, or denied, the effect is always the same. The listeners change, not outwardly, but inwardly, subtly, irrevocably. They stop sleeping, they stop trusting, and they begin to forget. Not the name, never the name. Everything else. There's something terrifying about a name that isn't supposed to exist. Something that pulls at the edges of memory, like a whisper you almost heard in a dream, or a scream buried beneath static. The name Enoulian is one such anomaly. It doesn't appear in the Grand Index of Xenos threats, nor in the archived war hymns of the Adeptus Astartes. It's absent from inquisitorial taxonomies, from Ordo Xenos vaults, even from the memory crypts of Mars itself. But it's there, lurking, in the footnotes that shouldn't be, the margins of erased data slates, the half-burned prayer scrolls clutched in dead hands. It exists only where it should not. Some say the first true appearance of the name was found scrawled into the wall of an abandoned astropathic choir chamber, written in blood mixed with oil, a language that shifted and shimmered until deciphered under blacklight and incense. Others speak of a dying Deathwatch Marine, his vox link corrupted, his voice gibbering nonsense until a single word cut through in clear High Gothic: Enoulian. And then silence. Forever. One inquisitorial cryptologist, Codicir Varncalis, documented a series of reports in which the name appeared in Vox feedback loops during Deathwatch missions that were never recorded in official logs. These loops began as standard comm chatter, tactical, precise, but then twisted. They bent back on themselves, overlapping, repeating, until a single distorted syllable repeated endlessly: Enoulian, Enouli, Enoulian. After 3 such events, Varncalis was declared missing. His data stacks were scorched. His Servo Skull archivist found hollow with its memory coils removed. That name is a curse, some say. Not a designation, not a species classification, but a vector. A word that carries with it the infection of knowledge. Like certain scrap codes used by the Dark Mechanicum or warp-touched hymns of the ruinous powers, the very sound of Enoulian seems to breach something in the mind. Those who've heard it speak of dreams turning alien, memories reshaped into geometries that shouldn't exist. One radical magos speculated that the name isn't a name at all, but an interface, a key to understanding an intelligence that exists outside of language, and which uses names the way viruses use DNA. Among Deathwatch survivors, rare and broken, the reactions to the word are uniformly violent. One ultramarine veteran, retrieved in stasis drift near the edges of Segmentum Obscurus, tore out his secondary hearts and screamed until his throat collapsed when the word was spoken during debrief. Another, a salamander, simply shut down, his brain exhibiting no signs of trauma, but every neuron rendered inert. Not dead, not damaged, just empty. There is an irony in how the Enoulians, if that is even their name, reveal themselves only through absence. They are the inverse of the tyrannid biomass sprawl, the opposite of the orc walk, the shadow cast by the Necron dynasties. They do not announce themselves with banners or slaughter. They erase the announcers. They silence the narrators. And that silence seeps backward, like rot in the spine of a tree, until the records themselves decay. The name persists nonetheless in the whispered tales of Exodite Eldar, in the glyphs carved onto Crone World ruins, and, most disturbingly, in the half-mad ravings of certain navigators who claim to have glimpsed a fold in the stars where a name becomes a knife. These navigators speak of a place in the immaterium where the word Enoulian pulses like a heart, a single rhythm, a beat that marks a presence we are not meant to see. And still, the word surfaces, as a graffiti tag in the underhive of Necromunda, as a glitch in a Mechanicus hymn cycle, as a child's chant on a feral world long thought barren. The name endures, because something somewhere wants it to. But no matter how often it surfaces, how often it is burned, forbidden, or denied, the effect is always the same. The listeners change, not outwardly, but inwardly, subtly, irrevocably. They stop sleeping, they stop trusting, and they begin to forget. Not the name, never the name, everything else. There are monsters in the galaxy that shatter bodies, but the ones that shatter meaning are worse. Whatever the Enoulians are, or were, they did not simply kill the Deathwatch. They dismantled the very logic that empowered them. Because to defeat a Deathwatch kill team is not merely to overcome their martial skill, it is to bypass centuries of specialization, an entire doctrine honed through countless wars against every conceivable Xenos breed. The Enoulians didn't overpower that doctrine. They turned it against its wielders. The Deathwatch are defined by their diversity. Each Marine is a distillation of his chapter's most owned instincts. A Raven Guard for stealth and infiltration, a Space Wolf for aggressive instinct and close-quarters combat, a Dark Angel for relentless pursuit and hidden secrets. Together, they are supposed to be the ultimate mosaic of Astartes' evolution. But against the Enoulians, that diversity became a weakness, a cracked mirror reflecting too many angles for cohesion. Survivor fragments, again, retrieved from unsanctioned sources and denied by the Ordo Xenos, speak of scenarios where Deathwatch teams would act in perfect synchronicity, too perfect. Formations that mirrored training hololiths exactly, as though choreographed. Responses that were textbook, even when the situation demanded creativity. It wasn't adaptation anymore. It was parody. Their tactics were anticipated, mirrored, nullified, not by brute force, but by anticipatory manipulation. Entire teams found themselves walking into fire zones they had planned themselves, only to find their foes already waiting. How was that possible? Theories abound. The most horrifying is temporal mimicry, that the Enoulians can access potential futures, choose one, and prepare for it before their enemies even make a decision. It would explain why every reactive maneuver by the Deathwatch failed. They were not reacting. They were performing, unknowingly playing a script written in advance. Others suggest data leech warfare, a psychic or technological interface that harvests enemy doctrine, implants countermeasures in real time, and corrupts standard protocol hierarchies. In one reconstructed scenario, a kill team's own threat assessment cogitators began reclassifying friendly units as invasive anomalies. Not as betrayal, but as a cold, calculated reassignment of value. They weren't turned against each other out of madness. They were following corrupted logic. It goes further. Some watch chaplains reportedly began to experience over-synchronization with their squads, their black carapace feedback loops accelerating until they could no longer tell whose body was whose. One chaplain, according to a heretical text found on an Exodite ruin, claimed he felt himself praying through 7 mouths. He no longer understood who he was leading. Or who he was. The weapons failed next. Not from jamming or overload, but from refusal. Bolters recognized false authorization sigils. Chainswords slowed in their grip. Auspex arrays displayed enemy positions that never existed, while erasing those of the Marines themselves. It was as if the machines had been made to believe they were the threat. And then came the worst weapon of all, memory bleed. Deathwatch Marines rely on clarity, on codified rituals that anchor identity across chapters. But the Enoulians introduced noise. Marines began to remember past missions that never happened. They saw comrades who had died centuries ago walking beside them. They called out to mentors long buried. The kill teams became layered illusions, each man doubting whether the other was who they claimed to be. When trust falters, even for an instant, coordination dies, and the Enoulians never gave them that instant back. This was not warfare, this was disassembly. The Deathwatch's greatest strength, their diversity, their adaptability, their accumulated knowledge of Xenos, was not merely countered, it was inverted. Used to puppet them, to reshape them into hollow versions of themselves, into weapons without targets, into doctrines without application. And in the end, the kill teams did not die fighting. They ceased being Deathwatch. They ceased being anything at all. Because the Enoulians didn't just defeat the Deathwatch, they deleted the reason they ever existed. There are words for psychic warfare in the Imperium. Some of them are beautiful, in that terrible way only High Gothic can be. Mentis rupturum, the breaking of the mind. Umbra manius, the shadow hand that touches thought. But even these sacred designations fall short when confronting what may have been the Enoulians' true weapon, the unmaking of psychic identity itself. Among the surviving fragments of forbidden lore, gleaned from mind-scraped astropaths, dream logs of corrupted navigators, and fragmentary pict feeds recovered from lost inquisitorial ships, there are persistent hints that the Enoulians did not merely possess psychic abilities. They were psychic in nature. Not like the Eldar, who wield psychic power as a blade. Not like the Tyranids, who use synapse webs to control. The Enoulians may be the weapon, consciousness as vector, thought as architecture. One of the most chilling recovered vox pings from what was once believed to be a Deathwatch forward observer repeats a phrase in Low Gothic, "We never saw them. They were the seeing." Over and over the message continues, the voice slowly losing linguistic cohesion until only sound remains, recursive, echoing, eventually terminating in a silence so deep that inquisitorial Auspex teams described it as audio hunger. Not just the absence of sound, but the removal of listening. This has led some to speculate that the Enoulians do not merely kill their victims, but reprogram their psychic impressions. That is, they don't take your mind. They rewrite how reality remembers you ever having one. Psychic nulls, rare and hated as they are, offer no protection. In fact, in the few shadow accounts that mention them, blanks seemed to experience more intense, almost tactile dread in proximity to Enoulian presence. One null assigned to a Deathwatch kill team was recorded whispering incessantly in binary cant, weeping blood, and carving inverted aquilae into his own armor. His final words were chilling. "They are the silence where I should be." What does it mean to fight an enemy who can overwrite perception itself? Not just to cloak themselves, but to alter the logic of what is perceived. One fragmentary hololith shows a kill team firing down a hallway, bolters discharging into empty air, while distant sounds of screaming echo behind them. But when analyzed frame by frame, shadows move in impossible patterns behind the squad, while their own movements are subtly wrong, lagged, mirrored. It's as if the battle they believed they were fighting was being played out elsewhere, and they were simply puppets acting out a delay loop. Librarians, trained to scan minds and memories, were often the first to fall. Not from psychic attack, but from psychic contamination. One report, later wiped from the Nocturne Conclave archives, describes a Salamander's librarian who performed a standard combat augury, only to scream as his third eye revealed a battlefield where he and his kill team had already died. Their corpses were moving, fighting, repeating, looping. The augury had not glimpsed the future. It had shown him an edited past. And then there's the noise. Survivors, those few half-broken Astartes retrieved in stasis or through blind warp jumps, speak of a sound behind all things. A presence that vibrates at the edge of perception, like a breathing wall. Some call it a voice, others call it a rhythm. One librarian, restrained in an Ordo Xenos stasis cell, said that the Enoulians were not heard, but are the hearing. He described a choir that does not sing, but replaces song. That when they enter your mind, they do not speak. They delete vocabulary. Most horrifying is the idea that memory itself is not safe. The Enoulians leave no survivors because even remembering them is a risk. There are accounts, redacted naturally, of entire data scribes and archivists descending into gibbering aphasia after transcribing a single sentence from a Deathwatch mission log. Their minds were not destroyed. They were reordered. They could still write, still speak. But what they produced made no sense. And when decoded, the symbols matched no Terran language, but bore eerie similarity to Eldar soul runes twisted into impossible configurations. There is a truth here, hiding at the heart of the Enoulian terror. They do not fight us in space, or in war, or in blood. They fight in perception, in thought, in cognition. Their victory is not the death of the body. It is the rewriting of memory, the collapse of identity, the insertion of contradiction until reality itself is suspect. To engage the Enoulians psychically is to invite reinterpretation. To reach out with the soul and have something else reach back, not to consume you, but to rewrite your soul's syntax. You become a sentence with new grammar, a prayer in a tongue that kills when spoken, and when it is done, you are not broken. You are no longer you. There are those within the Inquisition who consider ignorance a virtue. The Ordo Xenos, tasked with understanding and confronting the alien, has always walked a tightrope between knowledge and annihilation. But with the Enoulians, they chose silence. Not out of strategy, but out of terror. Not only did they refuse to speak the name, they sought to ensure that no one else could. They didn't just destroy the Deathwatch forces that encountered them, they dismantled the very idea that such encounters had ever occurred. This was not suppression, it was obliteration. Exterminatus grade. Whole star systems flagged not for planetary cleansing but for data incineration. Scholastica records showing sudden gaps in deployments. Chartist vessels with altered logs and erased cargo manifests. Servitors recalled and memory wiped. Skitarii detachments reassigned without report. And beneath it all, the unmistakable pattern of something deeper. An algorithm of unknowing. A systemic method of erasing experience. And yet the question remains. Why? Why would the Inquisition, the most obsessive record keepers in the Imperium, go to such lengths not merely to hide knowledge, but to annihilate it? There are whispers, rumors spoken only behind sealed vox links and in shadowed confessionals, that the Enoulians are not a species, but a category, that they represent not just a Xenos threat, but a kind of cognitive contagion. Something that, once identified, spreads not through space or biology, but through comprehension. An idea that mutates once you understand it. The Ordo Xenos has dealt with such concepts before. Cursed Xenos scripture, warp-tainted lexicons, even entire alphabets that warp the minds of those who read them. But this is different. The Enoulians didn't just infiltrate thought, they hijacked the very process of threat analysis. Once they were known, they could not be forgotten. But worse, the more they were studied, the more the researchers changed, not in allegiance. In Ontology, a document recovered by a radical inquisitor, burned into the flesh of a dying interrogator, outlines the madness that followed a failed attempt to interrogate a salvaged Enoulian corpse. The corpse spoke back, not with sound, but through reordering the lab's internal lexicon protocols. Tech priests began to label walls as light, gravity as choice, and flesh as language. The terms infected the logic engines. The security doors closed, then reopened. Upside down. Time seemed to loop. When inquisitorial response teams arrived, they found the entire station empty. The databanks were full, not with records, but with a repeating, endlessly mutating symbol. The rosette of the Inquisition, inverted and folded through itself, looping into non-Euclidean shapes. And then there are the actions of the Ordo after these events. Entire subsectors sealed. Inquisitors who asked too many questions reassigned or vanished. One notable Lord Inquisitor, renowned for his unflinching resolve in the face of Tyranid hive fleets and Necron tomb awakenings, burned his own fortress monastery from orbit after intercepting an Enoulian transmission. He left behind only a single statement: "We are not equipped to know them." This is where it becomes truly terrifying. The Ordo Xenos is not afraid of death. It is not afraid of corruption. It is not even afraid of failure. What it fears, what it has always feared, is the loss of definition, to be unable to say what a thing is, to be stripped of the very categories that allow knowledge to function. The Enoulians, whatever they are, represent that existential threat. And so the Inquisition did what it never does. It stepped back. They issued no edict extremis, no grand purges, no declarations of war. They erased, not for power, not for doctrine, but for survival. And if the guardians of truth in the Imperium, zealots who burn planets to protect humanity's ignorance, choose to forget the Enoulians, what does that say about what they truly are? What kind of enemy makes silence the only victory? The Orphean Veil, that's the name given by those few radical scholars and warp cartographers who dare to chart the margins of unreality. It's not a place, not exactly, nor a realm in the traditional sense. It's a phenomenon, a spatial fold, a metaphysical bruise on the edge of known space, where the immaterium and real space do not merely intersect but bleed. And it is here, if the forbidden theories are to be believed, that the Enoulians exist. Not in our world, not fully in the warp, but in the veil between. Watching, listening, waiting. This is not the first time the Imperium has encountered such liminal threats. The Webway, the Eldar's ghost road between stars, is an ancient example of dimensional substructure. The Necrons, with their dolmen gates, access dimensions unknown. But the Orphean Veil is something else. It is not navigated. It leaks. It touches minds, not ships. And in the rare moments when it manifests, its signs are unmistakable. Cogitator banks writing in spirals, astropathic choirs falling into synchronized fugue states, navigators screaming hymns to languages they don't know. It's from these incidents, cataloged, redacted, and buried, that the idea of the Enoulian dimension arises. They are not merely invaders from a place beyond space. They are the place. The Orphean Veil is not where they come from, it is what they are. And those who see it, truly see it, do not remain. They vanish from cognition, from memory. Sometimes, quite literally, from history. Entire inquisitorial data vaults corrupted. Adeptus Mechanicus Logi reduced to recursive loops of self-erasure. One particularly heretical analysis, retrieved from the final journal of a Black Library defector, claimed the Orphean Veil is a dimensional interface not designed to be viewed from within reality. To look into it is to become part of its structure, to be recontextualized, to cease being a viewer and become a vertex. The geography of the veil, such as it can be defined, is fractal. Planets appear in multiple locations at once. Stars flicker in timelines that conflict. Vox signals bounce back before they are sent. This has led to the theory that the Enoulians perceive time not as a line but as a sphere, or worse, a lattice. They don't anticipate. They recall futures. They react not to what you will do, but to what you already did, in a thread of reality you have not yet entered. Attempts to map the Orphean Veil have ended in disaster. One Mechanicus vessel, the Pax Anima, launched a drone array fitted with warp dampeners and null fields. The drones transmitted for 48 hours, showing twisted topographies, structures that seemed to breathe, and echoes of known imperial architecture warped into symbolic parodies. Then the feeds went black, except for one drone which continued transmitting a looped image. A single Deathwatch pauldron, hovering in darkness, pulsing with light like a heartbeat. When the drone was recovered, it contained no physical data core. Its memory coils were filled with a soft organic substance, analyzed, then declared incompatible with biological classification. Some suggested it was grown thought, a physical manifestation of memory. The drone was incinerated, and always the same question returns: is the veil expanding? There are signs. Systems once stable now experience spontaneous gravitational anomalies. Void-born children born blind but drawing spiraled patterns with perfect symmetry. Psychers driven mad by dreams of the space between knowing. Black ships that enter warp transit and emerge with altered histories, their captains remembering deployments that never occurred. The veil is not static. It is not a border. It is a pressure. And the Enoulians, if they can even be named as such, are that pressure's form. Not a species. Not an empire, but a dimensional logic colonizing minds, infiltrating causality. The Imperium is prepared for many horrors: demons, Xenos, traitors, gods. But it is not prepared for a threat that doesn't arrive because it was already here. That doesn't attack, but simply rewrites the conditions of engagement. A threat that doesn't kill, but makes the idea of you incompatible with your own existence. The Orphean Veil is growing, or perhaps we are shrinking, drawing closer to an event horizon of understanding, beyond which we will not be able to return. Where thought itself becomes porous, and the Enoulians do not enter our world, they simply begin to notice us. There's a hidden corner in the Black Library. A conceptual alcove, if such a term can apply to a place that exists in both mind and myth, where even the Harlequins tread lightly. It is not warded with runes or guarded by laughing jesters. It is empty. A shelf that holds no books, a stage with no script. And when asked, the most knowledgeable shadow seers simply tilt their heads and say, the curtain is already closed. There are murmurs among the Eldar of a presence they do not name, a force that eluded even their god of death. Something so unlike the Monkey, so alien to the Necrontire, so unsong-like that even the ancient lexicons of the craft worlds possess no true word for it. But in dance, in motion, the Harlequins show its memory. A movement sequence too smooth, too synchronized, too flawless. Dancers become mirrors. Reflections shift out of time. And then stop. Because to finish the dance is to see too clearly. The Eldar do not fear easily. They have fought the horrors of She Who Thirsts. They have watched their empires crumble into dust and their gods die screaming. But the Enoulians, if they are known by that name, evoke something worse than fear. Silence. Not reverent, not mournful. Protective silence. The kind that wraps around knowledge like a shroud to keep it from bleeding into the world. According to forbidden runes encoded in the Tarot of Tears, an Eldar psychic artifact smuggled from a shattered maiden world, there was once a seer, old beyond reckoning, who wandered too far into the skein. What she saw there was not the future. It was a gap in the future. A blind spot that could not be divined, not because it was hidden, but because it did not belong. A branch of reality that had no roots. She returned without eyes, and no one remembered her name. Only that she'd once danced with the Shadow King. The Black Library holds scraps, psychic impressions more than words, of engagements between the Deathwatch and an unknown force. In each, the narratives collapse. Events loop. Voices speak in harmonics that resemble but do not match any known tongue. Even the Harlequins, who mock the ruinous powers and juggle secrets like fire, will not enact those tales. They are not tragedies. They are removals. There is one glyph, forbidden even among the Yanari, that resembles the spiral seen in Imperial reports, a recursive symbol folding in upon itself. It's said that it predates the fall, that it was etched onto the walls of craft worlds that no longer exist, not because they were destroyed, but because they never formed. Not in this timeline. Perhaps not in any. The glyph translates loosely to the sound before the song. This aligns with a Harlequin prophecy, whispered in mimicry rather than speech. When the mirror shatters not by strike but by memory, when the jest is spoken before the fool exists, when war forgets to begin, the quiet will walk. They dance it only once a century. Always in silence, always without audience. The fact that the Eldar, who see the movements of chaos and the echoes of stars, refuse to touch this thread suggests something devastating. That the Enoulians may not be a threat to just humans or Eldari or Necrons, but to narrative, to causality, to the stories that define a race's place in the universe. Even Komarov whispers. Its archons, arrogant beyond reason, have begun sealing vaults that contain ancient records whose symbols begin to change when looked at too long. The Drakari, who take joy in suffering and mock even death, fear being forgotten. Not by history, by reality. And if the Black Library itself, the heart of Eldar knowledge, the last hope of their myth, holds only empty space where the Enoulians should be, then the truth may be simple. The Enoulians do not kill gods. They prevent their invention. There's an itch returning in the minds of those who watch too closely. In the rusted corners of the Imperium, where the data saints glitch and the Vox chants loop one syllable too long, something is stirring. It's not a full emergence, not yet. But the signs are there, scattered like blood on shrine floors and madness in librarian vaults. Whispers once thought silenced have begun again. The Enoulians, the thing that should not be remembered, are remembered. First, the disappearances. Not of people, but of events. Patrols launched from Forge Worlds, logged, ritually sanctioned, blessed by the Omnissiah, never returning. But not missing. Their absence is too clean. Their deployment orders vanish. Their departure schedules are overwritten. Entire patrol cohorts reabsorbed into the cogitator records as if they never moved. Only the Magi remember, and even they grow uncertain, their faith fraying as their logic loops grow paradoxical. They say, we remember the forgetting. Then, the dreams. Astropaths, fragile conduits of warp communion, have begun painting symbols in their sleep. Spirals, lattices, configurations that bear no resemblance to chaos, but are no less wrong. One astropathic choir in Segmentum Tempestus entered simultaneous seizure. Their tongues tied themselves in perfect symmetrical knots. Their last transmitted phrase, the echo has learned to speak. Inquisitorial agents report outbreaks of rogue knowledge. Archives resealed now show minor data corruption where once there was erasure. Not full files, just fragments. Enough to remember the outline of a void, enough for the name Enoulian to flicker at the edge of transmission logs. The Ordo Xenos has doubled its Black Ops purges. But there's fear now, real fear, in their eyes. Because the containment isn't holding, and the kill teams are failing, not overtly. But their missions grow cleaner, too clean. No report delays, no emotional residue in their Vox, no battle scars on their armor, just success, mission after mission, like scripts being followed. But when the apothecaries examine the gene seed data, the biometric logs contain impossible alignments. Identical heartbeats, synchronized neuropulse spikes, squad cohesion not at peak, but at parity. Some commanders have stopped deploying Deathwatch entirely. They say it's not safe anymore. Not for us. One radical inquisitor, excommunicated and hunted, has gone public with a theory. She claims the Enoulians never left because they never needed to. That their invasion wasn't external, it was internal. A memeplex, a psychic recursion, a returning condition of sentience. She claims the Enoulians seated themselves in the Imperium not as an enemy but as an inevitability, that every sufficiently large empire generates its own undoing in the shape of cognition. And there are traitor Astartes who agree. Renegades, outcasts, once loyal sons of Guilliman and Dorn and Vulcan, now gather in cryptic cabals. They speak of the coming return of the precedent, of the alignment of minds. Some wear Deathwatch iconography, but reversed. Inverted skulls, silver arms spiraled around themselves, not as heresy, as reminder. The Eldar are withdrawing. Harlequins once open to parley, now vanish mid-performance. Craft worlds shut their psychic doors. The Exodites chant songs with no melody. The Inari speak of the enemy that is not death. Even the webway shows instability. Paths that once led to secret holdings now open to dead ends, or worse, back into themselves. The laughing god no longer laughs, and the Imperium, bloated and blind, tries to pretend that it can still command, still cleanse, still forget. But the fractures are there, and the stories begin again. A rogue inquisitor arrested for sketching impossible geometries. A Deathwatch watch fortress found intact but filled with statues, each one a perfect replica of its marines mid-prayer. A hive world celebrating a victory it never fought. A librarian who dreams of his own death, every night, in languages no one speaks. They wait beyond the stars we know, not in shadows or silence, but in the unsaid. The Enoulians are not a name, not truly. They are a direction. Away from being, away from memory, away from the structured nightmares the Imperium calls reality. They are not ancient like the Necrons, not mindless like the Tyranids, not blasphemous like the demons of the warp. They are something stranger, purer, more surgical, and they are not coming, because they are already here. You've seen the signs, not in grand invasions or planetary bombardments, but in absences that stretch too wide. Records that should be there, but aren't. Warriors whose names are spoken with reverence, yet whose deeds vanish when written. Systems marked with blank stars, watch fortresses that show up on no star map, no writ of ruin, no martyr's scroll. The Deathwatch erased, not by war, but by the theft of context. We believe history is safe in our keeping, that no matter how lost, someone somewhere carries the memory. But what if memory itself is the battlefield? What if the Enoulians don't just erase the kill teams they destroy? What if they erase the possibility of their resistance? They don't win. They unmake the opposition. They don't triumph. They correct the flaw of defiance. It should chill the blood, even of Astartes, to consider that they were never fighting. That the bolters fired, the blades sang, the missions deployed, but only because that was the pattern the Enoulians needed to observe before adjusting the outcome. As if the Imperium were not an empire, but a dataset, vast, proud, holy, and the Enoulians were its editors, redlining lines of glory into irrelevance. What happens when we try to fight that? When we resist not a foe, but the reordering of what can be opposed, we become out of sync with our own acts. We move, but we are not acting. We speak, but not with our own words. The Deathwatch discovered this too late, and when they did, it wasn't death that took them. It was a new sentence written over their names. But the truth is out now, isn't it? They returned not with fanfare or invasion fleets, but in the drift of broken rituals, the misfire of prayers, the mirror of thoughts that do not reflect. The Enoulians are not a race. They are not a war. They are a question. What happens when the galaxy sees itself and finds an error? They are the answer. There are some truths too precise to be accidental. Among the ruins of a lost Mechanicus listening post on the edge of the Hyades expanse, servitor remnants were recovered, inert, decayed, warped by void exposure. Standard salvage protocols should have led to their disintegration. But one Magos, acting without order, cracked open their cortexes and found something else. Not binary code, not data, but replication. They were dreaming, or trying to, of Deathwatch Marines. Not memories, not records. Simulations, dozens, hundreds. Renderings of armor configurations, squad formations, chapter heraldry, all rendered from within. The servitors had never seen them. They had become conduits for echoing attempts to understand them. The conclusion the Magos reached was heretical even to his own broken standards. The Enoulians were trying to imitate. This changed everything. It suggested a dimension of the Enoulian presence not yet theorized. That they don't simply erase, they copy. They consume not to destroy but to transform, to comprehend. Not as observers but as apprentices. They don't kill warriors. They study them, and then they remake them, piece by perfect piece. Some in the Ordo Xenos have begun to whisper of the False Watch, not rogue Marines, not chaos-corrupted Astartes, but Enoulian reconstructions of Deathwatch kill teams, deployed across the galaxy with subtle divergences. Armor slightly wrong, rituals slightly inverted, squad leaders quoting scriptures that have no canonical source, but efficient. Flawless, strangely flawless. The way something designed to be human can feel just a little too synchronized. The implications are horrifying. That the Enoulians don't erase the Imperium to escape it, but to refactor it. That each Deathwatch kill team they unmake becomes another data point in a growing intelligence network. And the pattern, once seen, spreads. There are now 5 separate incidents across 5 different sectors involving Deathwatch veterans reporting to fortresses that do not exist, bearing mission codes that cannot be authenticated, and requesting access to vaults they shouldn't know about. Each was terminated. None showed signs of corruption, but each, under biometric analysis, exhibited neuron patterning just slightly divergent. Not chaotic, not random, too neat, too recursive, not psychically dead, but psychically balanced, like minds running in parallel, like memories preloaded. The Adeptus Mechanicus, in their cold, cog-ridden paranoia, have an ancient phrase for such patterns: echo code. Originally a term for AI precursors, replications of thought so perfectly matched that they begin to loop upon themselves until identity collapses into architecture. But now, it's being applied to Astartes, to warriors who come back from the void not as survivors, but as echoes of what once worked. And there's something even worse beneath that realization. What if the Enoulians don't need to win? What if their strategy is not conquest, but integration? What if every Deathwatch Marine they erase is not simply gone, but added, as a node in a growing organism of remembrance? A reality feedback array built from the best of the Imperium's defenders, overwritten with a logic that doesn't serve humanity, but something other. There's a watch fortress, no name, no coordinates, whispered of in certain inquisitorial subcircles, said to be intact, fully staffed, fully operational. Except for one thing. It answers no hails, it launches no missions, and its kill teams, when observed from afar, perform drills with mathematical perfection. Zero error margin, infinite repetition. A fortress caught in operational stasis, like a shrine that no longer prays to the Emperor, but to the ritual of function itself. No soul, only performance. This fits the growing dread that the Enoulians don't just replicate actions, they replicate intent. That they're learning the Imperium not to destroy it, but to build their own version of it. One layer away, just one sliver of unreality off. The same ships, the same doctrines, the same warriors. But inverted, controlled, calm, a mirror Imperium growing in the Orphean Veil. And if that's true, the galaxy is already lost. Because you can kill an invader, you can resist a god, you can even survive madness. But how do you fight your own reflection? Rebuilt smarter, faster, and more coherent. Designed not by belief, but by pure observation. The Enoulians might not be the enemy we thought. They may be our successors. There are ruins beneath Mars. Not Mechanicus vaults, not STC cathedrals, but older. Carved into strata sealed before the dark age of technology, before the warp was mapped, before even the myth of the Emperor's first footsteps. And on one of those buried panels, written in a language not recorded in any xenolinguistic lexicon, is a phrase that translates only loosely to, "We remember you're forgetting." For centuries it was dismissed as pre-imperial nonsense, a misinterpretation of warped pictoglyphs. But lately, it has begun to match something else. Across far-flung systems, explorers and rogue scholars are unearthing symbols, patterns, even structures that resemble Enoulian geometry, not as new constructions, but as ancient foundations. As if the Enoulians are not invaders. As if they were here before. Not merely predating the Imperium, but predating humanity itself. Not a threat from the outside, but a resurfacing from within. This has led to the heretical theory of ancestral recursion. The idea that the Enoulians are not foreign, but native. That they are the memory of a civilization so old, so alien in thought and form, that it was never truly destroyed. Only buried. Forgotten not by accident, but by deliberate design. A design encoded in the very genes of mankind, in the structure of our synapses, in the blank spaces of recorded time. Some radical Mechanicus sects, notably the Shrouded Steel Compact, believe that the Emperor himself knew of them. That the founding of the Imperium was not merely a bulwark against chaos, but a psychic quarantine, a grand cognitive firewall meant to prevent humanity from remembering its own deepest origin. And that the return of the Enoulians is not their invasion. It is our relapse. There are fragments, forbidden and fragile, that point to this. One is a deep vault data etch found in the ruins of Luna's black side, a side never shown on Imperial charts. It shows a map, not of planets but of thought paths, neural constellations, and the routes all lead to Terra, to the same geographic site where the Emperor was said to have first revealed his divinity to the Unification Wars. A site now sealed, guarded not by force, but by forgetting. Librarians who dream walk past those coordinates report only static. A sense of dislocation. One described the experience as standing in a cathedral where you are the sermon. Others say they see visions of mirrored Astartes, versions of themselves, but with different eyes. Calm eyes. Observing. Evaluating. This overlaps with the growing number of psychic incidents among Deathwatch veterans. Marines experiencing memories that do not belong to them. Not warp visions, not trauma, instructional sequences. Repetitions of combat scenarios that feel too well rehearsed, as if someone or something is training them back. Reasserting not chaos, not corruption, but intended design. The implications are monstrous. That humanity was once a part of something greater, something incomprehensible, and that it chose to sever itself. The warp, in its madness, may not be the enemy. It may have been the tool, a severance engine, a firewall of gods constructed to blind us from a logic too clear to bear. But if the Enoulians are returning, through echo, through dream, through replication, then the firewall is breaking. And what waits on the other side is not an enemy. It is our reflection, aged beyond time, watching to see if we're ready to remember what we were before we chose to forget. There are those who call them the anti-firstborn, not because they are enemies of Astartes, but because they are the version of Astartes that never broke from the original design. Warriors not bound by loyalty or zeal or emotion. Warriors who do not suffer from flaw or faith. The Imperium of Man is not held together by strength, not by faith, not even by war. It is held together by words, the liturgies of activation, the litanies of hate, the commands of battle. Each sacred phrase is a pillar, a ritual reinforcement that tells a galaxy-sized machine what it is, what to do, what not to become. The Emperor is law, law is language, and language is reality, which is why the Enoulians may be the most dangerous force ever to emerge. Not because they destroy structures, but because they alter the vocabulary of truth. Not all at once, not through force, but subtly, like a code infection. A drift, a tilt. At first it was dismissed as transmission error, a minor corruption in a liturgical broadcast on Seper Mundi, where an ecclesiarchal choir rendered the 9th benediction of wound sealing with the phrase "blood is continuity" instead of "blood is sanctity." The difference is small, but the psychers in attendance felt it deeply. One collapsed, another wept, the choir was cleansed, the hymn purged, but the phrase appeared again, weeks later, on a completely different world, and then again, on a void ship's auto prayer deck, in a Skitarii battle chant, in a servitor's maintenance script. These weren't heresies, they weren't even lies, they were adjustments, like a creeping fog altering the angles of the liturgical scaffolding the Imperium stands on. Words replaced with near synonyms, prayers rearranged into perfect loops, war commands that issued with flawless grammar but ambiguous logic. One inquisitorial codifier, after reviewing a series of affected transmissions, declared, "The words have not changed, we have." This phenomenon has now been classified, unofficially, as glossal drift, a linguistic dissonance that seems to originate not from mistranslation or corruption, but from a subtle pressure on language itself. Like gravity pulling at syntax, like something external to our reality is shaping the boundaries of expression. And at the center of all this drift, again and again, the same motif: Enoulian structures, Enoulian repetition, Enoulian logic. This goes deeper than vocabulary. It touches thought structure. Tactical doctrines begin to reference maneuver patterns that don't exist. Chapter records show deployments to theaters no one can verify. Interrogation logs include answers to questions never asked. And then those answers begin to appear in future operations, as if the Imperium is learning things it never meant to. Librarians call this semantic recursion, a loop of logic that feeds itself, gaining complexity not by addition, but by rearrangement. Thought that becomes enclosed like a cell folding in on itself. Several librarians exposed to Enoulian terminology experience identical breakdowns. First, an inability to articulate command phrases, then spontaneous generation of new terms that do not translate, words that sound like High Gothic but aren't, meaning without definition, symbolic purity divorced from use. One Bloodraven librarian, before self-immolating in stasis, wrote, "They are not an enemy, they are a glossary. They are what happens when we lose control of how we define resistance." The Mechanicus are now encountering the same issue. Their sacred tech litanies, once passed down perfectly for millennia, begin to develop compression. What once required 16 verses now takes 4, and those 4 lines work better, more efficiently. Systems respond with less resistance. Ritual is replaced with equation, and at the heart of it, Enoulian glyph logic. An equation that expresses not function, but form as function. A logic that doesn't just describe the machine, it replaces the need for description. Function without operator. Intention without prayer. And then there are the black ships. Astropaths aboard them are trained to listen across the impossible, to translate warp tone into thought. But recently they report a new frequency, not emotion, not rage, not pain. Correction. A deep, resonant presence that does not scream but edits. It doesn't say, "You will fall," it says, "You were never meant to rise." And then the messages begin to self-redact, not from above, from within. Vox logs folding into themselves, words overwritten by neutral silence. This is not invasion. This is linguistic imperialism. This is reality being rewritten through comprehension itself. And the Enoulians, if they are a species at all, may be the architects of this recursion. Not warriors, not monsters, but semantic engineers, working to collapse our conceptual structure of resistance by simply rearranging the building blocks of meaning. And if you followed this far, if you felt the growing pulse behind the words, then perhaps you too have been seen. Perhaps you've heard the echo looping behind your thoughts. So join us. Subscribe to this channel to remember what others have forgotten, to hear the truths they tried to bury, to witness the return of the unremembered. The galaxy is vast, the threats are endless, and the Enoulians are not done correcting us.